The distance was probably 1.5 to 2 miles, which means that you couldn't use your rifle to hit them. Certain nights we used the thermal vision and we saw them probably within 100, 200 yards, 300 yards.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we have a more timely combat story, where we sit down with the head of the Ukrainian Come Back Alive Foundation, Taras Chmut. Come Back Alive provides financing for purely defense initiatives, and since 2014, it has provided nearly 1,000 thermal imaging devices and over 250 UAVs, in addition to material support, technology, and training for the forces fighting the Russians on Ukrainian soil. Before stepping in to lead this organization, Taras was a Ukrainian Marine rifleman on the front lines in 2015, and then a commander of a reconnaissance unit with UAVs and signal intercept capabilities, providing a better picture of the battlefield, mainly around Mariupol, which we've heard so much about today. This, like our interviews with Aidan Aslan and Sergei Dyadkin, help shed light on what's actually going on in this Russian invasion and give each of us a way to do something about it, this time in terms of providing support to this important foundation, which you can do at www.comebackalive.in.ua. We've conducted much of this interview through a translator named Alexander, and I hope you appreciate this inside look from Kiev as much as I did. Taras and Alexander, thank you very much for taking the time to share your very unique story with us today. So we're looking forward to digging into a little bit more of what's going on in Ukraine, not just today, but I think what certainly a lot of Americans, speaking personally, didn't really realize how intense some of the fighting was, even back to 2014 when a lot of this kicked off, not just 2022. And I think that's what we'll get into with you. And the first question I have as I was preparing for this interview was your name, Taras. Could you share kind of where does the name come from? What does it mean in Ukrainian culture?
Тарас – це одне з класичних українських.
Taras is one of the old, I would say, even ancient Ukrainian names. You could say that's one of the classical Ukrainian names known in Ukrainian culture for years and probably ages.
Perfect. And Taras, could you talk to us just a little bit about what it was like growing up in Ukraine? Because a lot of Americans, we just don't understand. We just see America. What was it like growing up in Ukraine? Where did you grow up in the country? Could you share a little more there?
I'm originally from a region called Zhytomyr. That's about 120 miles away from northwest from Kiev. I'll be interpreting more than translating for you to understand.
Yep.
And in one of the suburbs of the city. Originally, I am from a small town with 30,000 population. I went to the elementary and high school there, 11 grades.
Потім вступив до Національного авіаційного університету в Київ.
And then I went to a college that is called the National Aviation University in Kiev. And I got my master's there, and my specialty, my major was the navigation equipment of planes. Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, so we're going to come back to aviation because we have that in common as well, and I know that plays a large part in some of your role in the military. But I just wanted to ask, as you were growing up where you were, and it sounds like, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but we're talking like the northwest part of Ukraine, right? Mm-hmm. Did you grow up around Russians? Like, was it common to have Russians in your school, or was it just purely Ukrainians in your town?
Якогось національного розподілу.
I have to say that this nation by nation in Ukraine doesn't really exist. That's more or less a myth. When I was growing, we were speaking either language when we needed, either Ukrainian most of the time or Russian when needed, and basically you could really say this is a Russian, this is a Ukrainian person. And
Або Білорусь.
In Zhytomyr region, you can hardly say that Russian nationals are more presented than, let's say, Belarusians or Polish people. So during years and years and years of the country, all of these nations were pretty assimilated into Ukraine. So you could hardly say that these people are of Russian culture, these people are of some other culture other than Ukrainian.
So there wasn't ever like this tension when you were growing up of, oh, that family's Russian, we're Ukrainian, Belarusian, none of that.
Ніколи такого не було.
Never.
Okay.
Never ever.
Man. Hey, just out of curiosity, what kind of stuff did you do as a kid growing up? Like football, like what was your kind of pastime as you were growing up?
Я ходив на шахмати,
I was doing chess,
на настільний теніс,
I was doing ping pong,
астрономію,
astronomy,
математику
math,
і ходив в гори.
and I was climbing mountains. I was hitchhiking.
Mountain climbing or hitchhiking for us is if you try to stop a car that you don't know and you hop in and go across the country.
My mistake. It's what do you call it? Going into the mountains, walking in the mountains.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Hiking, mountain climbing.
Mountain tourism.
Got it. Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit about the aviation side. So you say you go to school to get your master's in some type of aviation study. Did you have an interest in flying growing up?
I was interested in military in general when I was a kid and since I was a kid. And military aviation was one of the directions I was particularly interested in when I was growing up. So it was my conscious decision to go and to get a technical education in an aviation university. There are two aviation universities at present in Ukraine, one in Kharkiv, which is on the east of Ukraine, and in Kiev, which was simply closer to my hometown.
Відповідно, я вступив до Києва.
Therefore, I went and I applied to Kiev National Aviation University.
What started your interest in aviation? Do you remember?
I wouldn't say there was a particular case. I was interested, as I said, in a military topic in general, but at one moment of time, my parents presented me a book which was an index of military aviation aircrafts, something like that. And I started learning it and I started getting some taste of it.
And just so people have some context here, where are we talking to you from today? Where are you guys at presently?
We're in Kiev and at the main street of Kiev, which is called Kreshik. And this is where our office, Comeback Alive Foundation, is located.
Got it. Okay, let's to set some more context for people, because we're going to go back to 2014. Maybe if you could, Taras, could you talk about maybe how old were you in 2014, and could you talk through what happened with I think for many Americans, what we saw from like November of 2013 to February of 2014 with Yulia Tymoshenko. Could you just talk about how old you were and what you experienced at that time?
I was born in 1991. So at that time I was, 22, 23, something like that. Let me be pedantic.
Да, 23.
23, yeah. So we started with what we call the Euromaidan or Euro Square, the Revolution of Dignity, after which Russia had occupied our Crimea. So as for me, the Russia-Ukrainian war started at that moment of time.
Yeah, and I think for many outside of Ukraine, we might look at it and say, oh, Russia just invaded this year, but clearly this started a long time ago, and there's a lot of fighting and casualties, which we'll get into. And I think just so we have the people right, you've got Yanukovych, right, who is kind of this more Russian-leaning leader, and then you've got Tymoshenko, who is more European-facing, more Ukrainian-focused. And then the fighting kicks off kind of as Russia occupies.
You would probably have a hard time saying that Tymoshenko was an antagonist of Yanukovych. She was and she is one of the politicians of Ukraine. For us, she is not the most well-known. She is not the most powerful. She is not the most popular for us.
Interesting. Okay. So we have the protests. We have kind of this annexation of Crimea at the time. So you're 23 years old. What was your role as this is all happening? And what did it feel like for you as you watched these events unfold?
Це загалом доволі складний період часу.
It is a difficult question because imagine that was 2014, and saying that in 2014, in the middle of Europe, one country can invade and occupy a part of another country, it was at that time something close to being possible. What was more difficult for us is to realize that the reason why the rest of the world is just observing it and pretending like nothing special has happened. It raised a lot of emotions. Most of them were negative, and during this time, it was quite hard to understand how will it unfold, what will go on, and won't Ukraine become just a piece of land of Russia, like a colony or something?
Go ahead, Taras, if you had something else. No, okay.
That's basically the general idea.
Perfect. So you had come out of university. How did you find yourself in the military?
Finished my graduated February 2015. I graduated in February 2014, but starting from spring 2014, me and some other guys, the team of the military internet portal, became volunteers. And since I was active in the military topics, in the military in the middle of the military information from probably 2008, we had a lot of friends, colleagues, people that we know of who were from the military. They asked us to help them with defense, binoculars, whatever, because basically they had nothing. And we started raising funds and buying them those defense equipments, etc. And that's where I, as a volunteer, had started in the military, for the military. I was active in that before the spring of 2015. After I've graduated, I went to visit one of the Marine brigades of Ukraine, and I enrolled there. Help me with the names. My first official position was the gunman of the first unit of першого взводу, першої бригади,
Першої взводу, першої роти.
of the first platoon of the first company of the Marine Corps of Ukraine.
Got it. So this whole effort that you have for Come Back Alive that we'll talk about for today really started a long time ago, before your time in the military, just trying to raise some funding and equipment.
I was also, it's not exactly like you say, I was also being a volunteer in another project of myself. Come Back Alive existed at that moment already, but the head of the foundation was a different person.
I see. Okay. So you go from university, you're helping to raise, so get some equipment, raise some funds, then you join the Marines. How do your parents or in your family feel about you doing this when the tensions are so high?
Батьки не було ніякого спротиву, оскільки
I must say I didn't have any tensions with my parents. They are quite conscious and they understand that when the war is in your land, somebody has to stand up and defend your country.
Is it safe to say, I mean, I know that the fighting and the occupation at that time is in the East. Is it safe for me to assume that the whole country, this is what everybody's talking about day to day, is you've got a foreign occupier on your land, basically?
Yeah, it's quite accurate to say that there were foreign occupiers on Ukrainian land because they started from Crimea, and it was done exactly and specifically by Russian military people, servicemen. Then the same people were attempting to occupy Donetsk and Lugansk regions. And they also made some attempts to go to the south, which is Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Odessa regions. And as soon as Ukraine started to raise resistance, police resistance, and armed resistance, then it actually became a war. Of course, there were Ukrainian citizens who were supporting this occupation by Russian military forces. At the same time, there were a lot of people from the same areas that were strongly against it.
були російськими.
You have taken into account that arms, firearms, equipment, transportation, all was provided by Russian Federation. Military training was also done by Russia. Russian mercenaries were easy to get to Ukraine without any difficulties of crossing the so-called border at the time. Russian military instructors and Russian senior officers were on site, and they were literally managing the Russian troops and those local troops back on Luhansk and Donetsk regions.
Yeah. So let's talk about your time with the Marines. So you go from university and you're a rifleman now, is I think how we would describe it, or you're a Marine in our vernacular.
Yeah.
What can you talk about what type of operations you were doing? What was the first time you found yourself in a conflict?
Ну, спочатку я потрапив в районі Миколаєва на полігон.
First, I was at the training camp, at the boot camp at Mykolaiv area to get trained. Our battalion was formed and trained back there. In July 2015, after the training, we went to Shirokino to do the active combat. Our task was to keep the front line,
Контроль блокпостів і дорог,
to control the block posts and the roads,
патрулювання місцевості,
patrol on in that location, in that area, stopping the Russian spies and
Reconnaissance units?
Recon and saboteurs to the Ukrainian territories. And we also had to stop if Russian troops will advance towards Mariupol. In fact, Shirokino is a village on Azov Sea, which before the war was one of the resorts on the small sea. When we went there, when I was there, it didn't have any single building that wasn't ruined in any shape or form.
Even by that time, we're talking 2015.
Even at that time, by the summer of 2015.
So it was not a resort experience for you, is what you're saying to us. No vacation there.
No,
Right.
not at all.
No. Yeah. So could you tell us, when you were there, did you end up engaging with the Russian forces?
Most of the time, almost of the time, it was either mortars or artillery on us. We've seen Russian troops literally every day. The distance was probably 1.5 to 2 miles, which means that you couldn't use your rifle to hit them. Certain nights we used the thermal vision and we saw them probably within 100, 200 yards, 300 yards. But it was just an civil thermal vision. It was not a thermal rifle vision, so we couldn't shoot using that thing. And we had one scope and a night scope for the position, which was like 12 people. We had like 4 posts. Some of them were using those special equipment, and some were just listening.
When you say the posts, were you in these buildings that had been bombed? Were you in some other type of
Yeah, it was the building. It was a building. So we were having several posts in one of the buildings, which stopped the enemy from going on front of us or on flanks. So our defense line was the selected buildings where we're sitting and watching and defending. Sometimes it could be on a distance of 200 to 300 yards between those buildings.
Прямої видимості могло не бути через дерева, кущі.
Sometimes we couldn't see each other because of the bushes or trees.
І там можна було вночі приховано пройти.
And it would enable an enemy to go in between us if they succeeded. So sometimes we were having a forward and outposts to control the dead zones in between us. We were also putting some landmines on the territory.
Для недопущення теж прориву противника.
To stop the recon and saboteur groups.
What did it feel like for you being in those positions? Were you thinking, how is this possible in, the 21st century that I'm out here trying to stop somebody from invading?
You might say that in general it was like, I could say fine, even though it was a war. Maybe because starting from 2014, I was visiting the war zone as a volunteer, and I was hearing the shelling, and I got used to it. So it was something like common, I would use the word. Of course, when an artillery is working on your positions day by day, you couldn't call it a pleasant experience.
And I know that what you end up doing is transitioning over to unmanned aerial vehicles, right? So UAVs. But just before we get there, with the time as a rifleman, was there a moment where you were face to face with the Russians fighting and shooting, or did that not happen as in that role as a Marine?
Yeah, we had close shooting, but not on my position personally. What I had is probably you see a person is moving 500 yards, 700 yards away from you, and you shoot towards this person. At that moment of time, I might say that we moved into a mortar and artillery phase of war.
Або ж крупнокаліберних кулеметів.
Or you could say those were the large cal machine guns.
Або автоматичних гранатометів.
Or automatic grenade launchers.
And then,
yep.
So yeah, like this. Mm-hmm.
So if you can share with me this move to the UAVs, right? And is that the common term that we use, like that you would say in Ukraine as well? So I understand the aviation background, but how did you go from being a rifleman Marine to then moving over to UAVs?
That's the answer is quite simple. My term ended up on October 2015, and in winter 2015 I came back to Mykolaiv. And I was sent to a training held by Britons in Czechia by British instructors. It was called the BMAT. It is basically a training school for junior commanders. We were learning tactics
на рівні командирів відділень, командирів взводів.
On the level of platoon leaders or unit leaders, using the British military standards. And in fact, we were learning how to behave if you're in a block post, if you're doing not a trap, ambush, if you're preparing to set an ambush, how to avoid an ambush, etc.
До медичній допомозі.
TACMED, pre-med, pre-medical health, etc., and so on. I had 4 more training cycles with British instructors later on. That got me transitioned to a different military unit with a promotion.
В підрозділ розвідки.
I went to a Recon unit.
На командира відділення безпілотних.
And I became a head of the UAV unit, a UAV Recon unit. After that, I was transferred to a training site where I was learning how to operate an RQ-11B Raven American UAV. So I am where I was an operator of the US UAV. I was also participating in a Sea Breeze Ukrainian American training. We spent 3 weeks with the US Marines. We also learned all kinds of military actions you can think of: mining, setting landmines, demolishing, clearing the buildings, etc. Airborne landing from helicopters. It was back in 2015, and the amount of training we had was intense. It was September 16th when I was sent to Lithuania, and I was in the training center where they trained instructors for NATO countries. 1 month training, exams, and if you succeed, you become a third-class instructor. After that training, my new battalion went to the ATO, anti-terroristic operation.
Я повернувся з Литви.
I came back from Lithuania at that time, and I was offered the position of the Recon platoon commander. So within a year, that was my final position in the active duty.
And this is RQ-11s. Is that what you had in your unit at the time?
We had it, so we had Raven for a certain period of time. I was doing combat flights during that time with the RQ-18, but we had only a few of them. And we were using one plane from our neighboring military unit. I like this plane and I like it a lot. I think it's a good plane.
Wait, what is it? Can you tell?
Який саме це
Так, Raven.
Raven.
Oh, Raven?
Raven, yeah.
Raven. Okay. So, yeah, could you talk to us then just in a little bit more detail about, as you're a UAV platoon commander, how many aircraft did you have and what was your mission at the time?
It was reconnaissance platoon of a battalion. We had 2 APCs and one Jeep, one off-road vehicle. 26 positions, 26 people.
4 відділення.
4 units, 2 fighting units, 1 UAVs, and 1 deciphering the reconnaissance information. We were processing the information that we received. So our task was, you can say, we had to do a reconnaissance in the piece of land our battalion was responsible for. And it was probably up to 10 kilometers, which is like 7 miles depth, 7 miles deep. We were also used as a counter recon reserve. And sometimes the battalion commander was using us as his reserve when needed.
And so of the 4 units you talked about, you were the UAV unit. That was your responsibility, Taras?
I was the head of the platoon, which had 4 units in
Got it. Okay.
So I was the head of the whole thing.
I see. And what area were you covering at the time? What town were you in?
It was closer to Mariupol. It was the closest towns you can name is
Чермалик,
Charmalik
Pavlopol.
and Pavlopol.
Okay. And so are we talking 2015, 2016 now?
16-17.
16 to 17.
16 to 17. Can you describe what type of, maybe give us a typical mission that you might run? What did it look like as you had the UAVs out there?
Well, I have to say that most of my service was not closely connected to UAVs because at that moment of time, we didn't have our own Raven. Sometimes we had a chance to borrow it from our neighbors, but it was not every time, as they needed the plane as well. So most of our missions were being at the observation post and observing an enemy. Also, we were doing patrols in the gray zone. We were testing or checking the dead zones between our lines of defense. When necessary, we were setting up landmines there, or we were unsetting the landmines when we had to. In spring of 2017, we got a quadricopter drone that we got from volunteers. It was DJI Phantom 4. And we started doing the aerial reconnaissance using this drone. We were also using the radio scanners to listen to the radio conversations. So we were gathering the information from all kinds of sources in order to create a portrait of our enemy. How many units they have, what equipment do they have,
На яких частотах вони здійснюються радіообмін?
what frequencies do they use to talk, where the staff is located, where the reserves are stationed,
І так далі.
so all types of recon information.
Were you using that information for artillery at the time, or was it just to build a picture of the battlefield?
Mapping those targets for artillery was one of our tasks, and if necessary, when the artillery strike was decided to go, then we were doing the artillery corrections. I personally have an experience of tell me the proper term for that, correcting
Adjusting fire?
Adjusting fire of 120 mortar and 122 cannon, which is called D30.
Okay. You're saying your unit was doing that, was doing some of these adjustments, Taras?
My unit, but most of the job on adjusting fire was done by me personally.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And just out of curiosity, so at that time, when you're adjusting fire, are you looking at kind of individual troops moving? Was it on stationary targets like buildings or vehicles? What type of mission profile was it?
Most of the times, those were the enemy positions with the armored vehicles or large number of enemies in one place.
Got it. Okay. What did it feel like to go from being a rifleman kind of soldier to now you're commanding this platoon 4 units?
Probably was quite normal. It wasn't difficult or tough for me because I had enough training and education at that time when I did the transition. Also, prior to the service, I was in an organization with 20 people who were my subordinates. So managing people was not something new to me at that time.
Got it. And so you do that for, you say 2016 and 2017, is that right?
Це було з 16 по 17 рік.
Just out of curiosity, are you deployed the whole time? Do you stay out there for like 3 or 4 months and come back for some time? How does that work?
My second rotation was 9 months in the field all the time.
Got it. Okay. And at that time, are you able to communicate back with your family, or is it pretty locked down?
Communication, internet, phones was not a problem every day,
Крім виконання задач.
unless you're on a mission at the moment.
Got it. Very cool. So how do we end up going from there, where you're kind of leading troops on the front lines, Taras, to what comes next with Come Back Alive?
When I was a serviceman, the Come Back Alive Foundation was helping with tablet PCs, with thermal vision, with drones, with the communication equipment, and we were recipients of their help as well. So we became friends, and after I finished my active duty, they offered me a position of the military analyst in the foundation. After a certain time, I became a team leader of the military analyst group, head of the military analyst department, and then I became CEO of the organization.
What kind of work were you doing as a military analyst in that type of organization? And maybe we should pause for a second. What does the Come Back Alive Foundation do?
Зараз?
As of right now,
Maybe at that, if it's changed at that time and then now, what?
well, okay, we're probably doing the same thing, but just on at a different scale.
Okay.
Back in 2015, as of right now, Come Back Alive Foundation is probably one of the largest foundations that provides an assistance to the Ukrainian army. We are providing our military units with communication, thermal vision, night vision, medical aid, transportation, and defense, etc., etc. It's actually a large list. And so, etc., means that during the last couple of months, we provided our military with all kinds of equipment, totaling about $100 million.
Just out of curiosity, why is there a private foundation doing this as opposed to maybe the Ukrainian military or government?
One of the reasons is the government, well, it's my translation, but it's not a private foundation, it's non-governmental foundation. Just for
no, that's important.
Yeah, it's the government is not fast enough, and sometimes they just don't have enough time or capacity to provide what is needed to the military.
How do you find the right units to push your aid to, or the equipment to?
Military people ask us directly, and during those years, we have friendly relations with heads of brigades and even heads of battalions.
І це вже прям дружні стосунки.
And friends means we are friends. We know them, they know us, they tell us what they need in our area of expertise, and when we can, we provide them with the equipment we have. Therefore, we are making our army more effective, more capable of fighting, and that's how we save lives of our people.
For people in the US who would like to help, how, I guess, number one, let's start here. How could they help?
We are accepting donations via our website. The second, they can subscribe to our channels in Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Next, they can spread and repost information about our war, thus asking American, US politicians to help Ukraine to provide assistance to Ukraine more. It's very simple. Without the Western weaponry, without Western military equipment, we are not capable of winning this war. We don't need American soldiers, people,
Але ми потребуємо американської зброї.
but we do need American
У
weapons.
нас є кому з нею воювати.
We have people to fight,
І це чудові солдати.
and our soldiers are great people,
І вони краще російських.
and they're absolutely better than Russian
І
soldiers.
попередні 3 місяці це показали.
And we have 3 months of proof to that.
Але
So
нам
true.
потрібні зброї.
But we do need an equipment. We do need armor.
For people who might say, well, I don't know where the money is going to go, how do you talk about the transparency, and how do you speak to people about, yep, the money is going to this good cause?
Starting from 2014, we are reporting every month online on all of our donations and all of our expenditures. When
So-
people subscribe to our social media, they can see pictures with numbers, with amounts, what was given to whom in what amount, and how did it cost? How much did it cost?
That's excellent. There are a few people that I know who I've interviewed on this program, actually, Americans and Europeans, who have gone over to help train Ukrainians. And a common request I get from them is, can we get medical equipment? There's just not enough of it coming in. So it's great to hear that you're able to push this type of equipment to the forces over there.
But I would also say that we do need communication equipment, which is very important.
Exactly.
Vehicles, off-road vehicles, medevacs are really important in our situation. Armored military techniques is not enough totally. So that's like, you can say it's like an Africa war of pickups.
Got it. Is there any part of you, Taras, that wishes you were still in uniform out there on the front lines, or do you prefer being where you are now? Not, and I know you're in Kiev, so it's not like you're safe and in the back, but just like, is there a part of you that wishes you were out there out front again?
Probably, as any serviceman, I feel a draw to come back. But I understand that being here and managing this institution, the foundation, I'm way more effective than I would being just a soldier in the front line. Over half of foundation people are ex-military,
Від полковника до солдата.
from colonel to rifleman, from artillery people to pilot, from Marines to Recon people.
That's awesome. How big is the foundation now? How many people do you have supporting it?
We have a total staff of about 70 people at the moment, and about 50 people who are volunteers, which means they're helping us doing our regular routines.
Wow. And one question I just want to ask you about is somebody who is incredibly popular over here, Zelensky. What does he mean to you? Have you met him? I don't know, but like, what's your impression of Zelensky?
We've met last year, and during this war, he presented himself as a president that is capable of being with the country who's winning the war. And we have our hopes to win this war earlier or later.
If you look a few years in the future, right, and assuming that the war ends, do you think a kid growing up in wherever you grew up, Taras, in your hometown, will it be different for them with, like, there were no nationalities, it wasn't Russian, Belarusian, Ukrainian? Do you think that'll change 5 or 10 years from now? Do you think it'll be different for?
Of course, this person would grow different. The war had touched literally every person in the country. And the future in Ukraine will never be as it used to be before. There will be no Russian culture as it used to be in Ukraine anymore. And Russia in the coming decades will not be a friendly neighbor that we have. You just simply cannot attack a neighboring country out of the blue just because this country wants to pick its own future and not go and be a part of the ex-Soviet empire.
Yeah. Just one or two more questions here, and I'll let you get out, Taras. Could you tell me, what are you most proud of from the foundation?
probably I'm proud of the fact that our assistance, which is a relatively small amount anyway, it multiplies the defense efforts that we have on the front line. What I mean is we're not capable and we don't buy tanks or planes or cannons. Our soldier is equipped with a tablet PC when needed, with a night vision, with a thermal vision, with communication device, with individual protection, with a decent uniform, with a vehicle that brings him in and out of combat. So on a combat field, Ukrainian soldier, an average Ukrainian soldier, is relatively better equipped than an average Russian soldier. And this is one of the reasons why we have so many of these soldiers that we are capable of winning with this amount of Russian soldiers.
Well, this has been great. I really appreciate the time, Taras and Alexander. Thank you for this. And we'll have links so that people can see more about Come Back Alive. They can donate, help out, and kind of see where the money's going to, which is really interesting. It's something we couldn't do a long time ago. And given this age of technology, I think it's great that you're able to show and trace back, hey, this money's going here, and you can go and find it and see what's happening. And Lord knows that people need it in this fight right now. So thank you for what you're doing. Thanks for the time you took with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation, for being live with us today. And I would like to thank the country for the immense efforts of assistance that you're providing us today. Without this assistance, probably we wouldn't be capable of talking today.
That's great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. For those supporting the Combat Story Patreon community, we've included an exclusive extra from this interview with Taras and Alexander, where they discuss a bit more after we stopped recording that gives more perspective on what their lives are like today. You will never guess what Alexander does when he's not translating. Head over to www.patreon.com/combatstory to see it. Our first comment today is on YouTube. It's from the James Rosone interview from George Cool. It says, I really hope this channel gets the recognition it deserves. These warriors and smart people's stories are a part of American history and really should be told. Thanks, gentlemen. And then there was a reply from Mark S. Says, I couldn't agree more. Every Saturday at noonish, I'm hitting refresh on the channel until the next interview pops. Man, that's really cool to hear that people are waiting on these. They're so interesting. We've got so many good ones lined up too. I wish y'all could see them. But stay tuned, and thanks for the positive notes. And George, you're right. I mean, these stories need to be told. There's so much that goes into the lives of these men and women. And then our next comment is on Facebook. It's about the Carl Erickson interview from Jake Chestnut. He says, Ryan, I love what you're doing here. I'm not a veteran, but I did try to enlist in 2013, but was unfortunately medically discharged. Your interviews and the people you talk to have helped me in numerous ways when it comes to mindset, determination, and mental health. I love your podcast, and I am grateful for everything you're doing, sir. Thank you. Yeah, I will say I didn't really expect to get this type of insight from these interviews when I started years ago. But the mindset, the mental health, the determination, they are all there, especially as we talk to these serious operators who just had to work at such an elite level for so long. It's been amazing. And I draw insight from that as well. So I'm really glad to hear you do too. So thanks for leaving that, Jake. Appreciate everyone staying tuned and listening. And stay tuned for more. We got some great ones coming y'all's way. So stay safe.